Today we're speaking with Dr. Nancie Evans, who's the co-founder and CEO of Culture Strategy Fit, a leadership and consulting firm dealing in culture, and author of Where Culture Meets Strategy: How to Solve Problems, Change Behavior, and Lead Your Team to Success. Nice to be here today with you, Nancie.
Oh, thank you for having me. This is awesome. Really appreciate the opportunity.
It's a pleasure. So I know that this book has been a labor of love for you and has been something that you've worked tirelessly to have come to life. So tell us, what made you decide to write this book?
Well, I've been working in the culture field now for over 35 years. And one of the things that, well, I should start saying that the reason I've been in the field for 35 years is because I have been on a lifelong or career-long search to really understand what is it that makes organizations tick in terms of culture, and how do we actually make meaningful, sustainable culture change happen in organizations. And I realized that a lot of people out there are struggling with the same challenge. And there's some benefit in being able to share 35 years of lessons learned, like what works and a lot of what doesn't work so well, and the hope that maybe it'll help some other organizations and some people.
So I can definitely appreciate that your years of experience will be helpful to many who will be reading this book. And specifically, though, who is the book intended for?
Well, I wrote it for HR and OD practitioners and leaders, because they're often the people who are looked to lead the culture initiatives and culture change in organizations. I do think it's definitely something that a lot of leaders would benefit from reading as well, because it talks about the critical role that leaders have in leading the whole culture building and culture change journey in an organization.
And would you say that HR and OD professionals are comfortable with the whole topic of culture?
Good question. Um, I think that there are a lot of myths out there that people grasp onto, and unfortunately, it leads to a lot of wasted time and energy.
Mm.
And not any fault of any HROD professionals, is just kind of what's in the general field space. And what I mean by that is things like, we're going to do a survey and it's going to fix things. We'll do a classic action planning gap analysis and it's
Mm.
going to fix things. We're going to run training programs. We'll do a values initiative. Not that any of them are bad. I mean, I think it's a yes and situation.
Yes.
But unfortunately, I mean, so much time and energy gets spent on doing things where there's very little traction and very little benefit. So what I'm hoping with this book is it's going to be able to say, hey, understand the strengths and weaknesses of those different approaches, but let's think differently about culture. And if we can think differently about culture and I mean by that, take a business mindset to the way we think about
Mhm.
culture, we can actually start to make some traction and some headway, and hopefully sustainable over time. I don't know if that
Right.
answers your question, but yeah.
Yes. So there's an allure to the, I guess you could say, things that are quick to do sometimes, or that are easy or easier to do. So
Yeah.
it's part
I
of,
think,
I think, how we're trained in a way as a society, not just as professionals, but it's
yeah.
it's our general society. We often want things that are easy and quick.
Yeah, I think that's true and proven, right? So there's a lot of um, books written, articles written about changing culture by first we understand our current culture, then we think about what culture we need, we identify where the gap is, we do benchmarks against our
Mhm.
industry, and then we focus on, so what actions are we going to take to get there? That's the classic. It's a problem solving strategy in that it's something that most people are comfortable with. It's what we're familiar with. It's what we're told is the right thing to do. So that's where we go. And unfortunately, I mean, I tried that for, for a
Yes.
long time. And it's where it can help to an extent. But the problem is that it is really difficult to change beliefs and mindsets through action plans. It's and gap analysis. And
Yeah.
that's what you need to be really thinking about when you start talking culture and culture change.
Agreed. So that being said, as you noted, there are many books, articles, and
Yeah.
whatnot written and available. So how would you say that your book differs from what we see traditionally in space of organizational culture and organizational change or culture change?
The biggest difference is that I do exactly what I just said, which is to talk about culture and position culture and culture building and change through a business lens. And a business lens being asking the question of why. And by at the why, what is the benefit to the organization? What is going to be different if we were to do this? And so, for example, why often as OD or HR professionals, we'll get asked things like, okay, we need to have our culture isn't right for us. We don't have enough collaboration. We need to have a more
Mhm.
collaborative culture. That's one of the most common things that
Right.
certainly I hear. And so then, typically what would happen is we would go out and we say, okay, so let's understand what collaboration is, where it's strong, where it isn't, maybe build on the where we're already doing it well, and then we're going to put in some actions and practices to be able to become more collaborative. Fine. Problem is, again, why?
Okay.
So for culture and culture change to be successful, we leaders must own it. They must be 100% accountable for it. They must be actively involved in it. They must lead the way. Their decisions and choices around things like processes, policies, structure, etc., must be consistent with the type of culture that they want to create. If it's handed off to HR or no D, without that, it's not going to be effective. So where I talk about is that how do we get that level of leadership ownership and commitment and involvement in the culture process? We get it by actually focusing on the business value of investing and engaging in culture. And I talk about the whole thing about culture, where culture and strategy meet, the relationship there, and how if there is a misalignment, it creates drag, which creates a business problem. Now we can start to say, how do we solve the business problem? What are the behaviors we need to have in place to make that happen? The actions are going to be, we're still talking solving a problem created by, but this time it's a problem created by the culture and the changes to behavior and beliefs that need to happen to get the outcomes that we need. A lot to say in a long time, but I
Yes.
think that's where
Yes.
those are really the main differences in my book versus what else is out there.
Right. So we're taking an approach that's a bit more holistic, that's integrated,
Hmm.
because often they're seen as projects and not part
True.
of business strategy.
Hmm.
So as you've said, the notion of there has to be a business reason why we do this, leads me to think of that adage we hear often in our discipline is that culture eats strategy for, I call it breakfast, lunch. We've heard
Yes.
it in different forms, right?
Yeah.
So where I'm thinking is relative to what you were talking about, that even if your strategy is set to go in a certain direction, but your culture is not enabling it, your business will not be able to lead itself in the direction the strategy wants to go in. So do you believe that though, that culture will be that drag if it's
That's
not in
that's
line or yeah.
absolutely, that's exactly. I mean, that's where the title of the book comes from. Is you could have called it, culture eats strategy if
Yeah.
you'd like.
Yeah.
But yeah, absolutely. And I actually talk about culture drag dynamic and how where you can have an organization. I mean, well, let's be honest. Most organizations have a culture for a reason. It's served a purpose. It's worked for them. It's helped them to be successful. The problem is that something happens. Usually, well, it can be internally. It can be like we decide to invest in SAP or another enterprise technology, or go through a massive restructuring, expand our business. But often it's external, and those external things that happen, such as customer demographics and needs change, new competitors enter the market. We have things like a pandemic happen, and the culture and the strategy that worked for the organization in the past is no longer sufficient to survive and thrive. So we change a strategy. That's the first thing organizations often will do,
Right.
is to adjust and change the strategy. Say we're going to, we need to tweak this. We need to go after new markets or new customers, or innovate more, or new products, and we're going to acquire new companies. And then they expect that, that's okay. The culture we have is going to support that, and it's going to enable us and
Right.
continue to allow us to be successful and thrive. And the reality is that the culture they need to execute that new strategy is very different from the one they have, or different in important ways.
Right.
So, I would never say change everything about your culture, because there's obviously going to be strengths that are core to who you are and what is very important and valued. So we hold that. But what are those other things that can be changed, that need to change, if you're going to be successful in
Right.
executing your strategy?
So that's really important. So then my question to you would be, can they happen at the same time? Meaning, can you
Ah,
be building the culture that you need at the same time as you're trying to execute the strategy? Or does the culture need to be at a certain place before your strategy can be executed?
no, that's a great question. Ideally, organizations would be thinking proactively and saying, as we're going to make this change to our culture, our strategy, and in order to do that, we need to be thinking proactively about the shifts that we need to make in our culture to make it happen. And you could do that, and that would be great. Unfortunately, usually that's not the case. I mean, in most cases, it's when the culture becomes a problem that I get the phone call.
Right.
Right? Now
Right.
it's like, and usually they don't even think of it as a culture problem. Most leaders, that I'll hear about, will be thinking of it as, we're having problem with strategy execution. We've tried
Execution.
structure changes. We've tried process changes. We're not getting the buy-in that we need from
Mm,
people. That's it. So we're now into a change management challenge. I was like, well, hold on a second here.
yeah.
Let's really understand what's going on. And but I think, I mean, if we could get people to be thinking, and I mean people, I mean leaders,
Right.
and that would be the role of HROD, is not to do it, obviously, but to be influencing and educating leaders, so they
Yeah.
understand the value in really proactively thinking about that alignment of culture and strategy right from the beginning when they're embarking on a new strategy.
Yeah.
Then you have the opportunity to prevent it from becoming a problem, which would be the ideal world.
Right. So in that case, the ideal would be that HR or OD professional or executive does have a seat at the table, so that when the conversation is being had about strategy, the next move, where we're headed, that as a professional, we have the optic. We have the ability to bring that to the conversation, to speak to the potential drag that can
Yeah.
happen between the reality and the desired, and to have enough credence to be heard.
Yeah, I think what you just that last point is credible, is
Yeah.
incredibly important.
Yeah.
Um, because if you start talking in fuzzy culture language,
Hmm.
I don't think you get heard. I think if you talk in language that says, thinking of this execution challenges we are going to have with our strategy, and it's going to require some different behavior, then you can start to have get it's back to the same thing. How do you speak the language of the leaders
Right.
who are not, let's say, tuned in to the culture as a field, or even as a way of looking at the business, so that they actually listen and they understand its importance. I think in most cases, when you start talking to leaders about This change is going to require this change in our strategy
Mhm.
is going to require business change, is going to require a shift in behavior. And we need to be, for us to get the benefit of this, we need to be proactive. And how we address that, I think you can get heard.
You can get
Um,
heard. Yeah.
but I do think it's interesting. One of the, you asked me earlier, just in terms of how prepared HR and OD professionals are, you can talk about culture or do this kind of work.
Mhm.
And I think that's the critical thing, is helping them to be able to have the right conversations with leaders so that it's right from the beginning understood of where they can add value, where we can add value, but also what the role of the the leader is in all of this.
Which is a great gift in your book, because that is something that you are offering up in much of, the stories you tell in your book. So it does give us as professionals some lenses through which to look at the conversation and to maybe even reflect upon before having the conversation, right? So that our language, as you said, is in their language. And so that we're not coming, one of the things we talk about often in our discipline is that we use a lot of jargon.
Right.
And that jargon doesn't get us to the business result, because unfortunately, people take it as either it's too soft, too gobbly-gop, or
Yeah.
whatever, terminology they want to attach to it. So your book brings a lot of practical
Yeah.
ways to look at it, which I truly appreciate. And so as someone who's reading this book, what do you hope that they'll take away from, or what, key lessons you think that they should be hopefully taking from the book?
Well, I liked what you just said, which is that having a way to have a conversation with other leaders or business leaders that takes away the mythology about culture and
Mm.
makes it practical and makes it real, talks to them in language they understand so that they can see the value. So I think that if that helps to achieve that objective, that's wonderful. I mean, that's great. I think being able to further to that conversation, talk to that culture drag dynamic and the incredibly important role that culture and behavior, if you want to make it simpler,
Mhm.
has in the strategy execution, so that you can get to the why paying attention to this is important early. And also, third would be being able to have a really frank conversation with leaders about their role and what that means in very tangible terms. And back to being accountable, actively involved, and aware of their actions and decisions, so that when you embark before you embark at any kind of culture behavior change initiative, that you've got that level of buy-in and commitment. If that's not there, and I say this numerous times throughout the book, is you're not going to have a successful culture initiative. You really aren't. We cannot change the culture. It's the people who make those day-to-day decisions, who every other employees see, interact with, listen to, you know, they're the ones who are going to be shaping it in every moment and every decision they make.
Yeah. Do you think that there is a shift happening in the business community, or let's say call it leadership thinking, that is seen as something that is a core task or competency? Because if you look at, if someone who goes to business school, let's put it that way, you're going to have finance, you're going to have marketing, you're going to have sales, you're going to have operations. Is there somewhere, because I know you're also involved
Yeah,
in higher education, some
right.
conversations around leading culture, or whatever you want to call it? I don't know if there's another terminology that's better fitted to
Yeah,
having them hear it. But this should be a core area of business, just as
oh,
in
I agree.
operations or marketing. So are you seeing any shift at the level of education that you've noticed, or?
Yeah, I think there's higher level of awareness. I mean, there certainly are surveys out there that from, you see published in large consulting firms talking about, things like, 70% of executives say that, or CEOs say that culture is the most important thing, and the thing the thing they worry the
The
most.
worry. Yeah.
Yeah, so there's a lot of that awareness, I think, which is a positive step for sure. The challenge is so what do you do about it? And,
Right.
there's billions of dollars being spent annually on culture initiatives. So it's not that organizations aren't investing in it or see the importance
Mhm.
or that. I think the challenge is in the where they're investing and how they're
Yeah.
investing. That's where things are breaking down. So if we can actually, wouldn't it be wonderful? We can come in and say, we have a way of addressing this that is going to make a difference in a reasonable period of time and be sustainable for the long term so that, I think the more we can prove that, we can get the small wins in our work to show that change happens. We can get sustainable behavior change. Um, I think that's the sort of thing that's really gonna start to get some traction here.
Right.
And that would be, I guess, is one of the things I would hope is that he said even in the approach that I recommend, it's not to go in and do a massive culture change.
Hmm.
It's to go break it down into, manageable chunks and say where there really is a value, prove it in, take this approach, prove it in, and then build momentum so you create a pull effect for change in
Right.
the organization
Yes.
versus
Which,
trying to sell it and push.
well, and that is sort of traditional methodology, is we're told as long as you have the right message, the right words, if you
Ah,
communicate it properly, it's always a sales job, which is something that for me has been not natural and not at all effective.
yeah,
And like you, I've always spoken about pull, right? So if people want something, it becomes theirs versus it's hard to sell someone something they don't want.
yeah, no, for
But
sure. Yeah.
there's an adage that says we don't like to be sold, but we love to buy.
I like that. Yeah,
So,
yeah,
people do want to get involved in things, but not in things where they feel it's being imposed or pushed. So that'd probably be for a whole other conversation.
yeah. But I think there's that whole idea of um when we talk about having the conversations, those are just to get people interested. You then need to go to action. And you have to have an actionable solution that you can offer that isn't, hugely complex and
Overwhelming. Yeah.
expensive and overwhelming.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Because leaders have so many things on their plate. I mean, I don't know about you, but I mean, the biggest complaint is that they're in back to back to back meetings,
Meetings.
right? If the only
Yeah.
time they have to actually do work is going to be late in the evening or possibly on weekends, and even then it's probably getting ready for the next set of meetings.
Yeah.
So how do we get their attention, on this kind of thing? And I think we do it by making it seem like here's a manageable undertaking that has a high potential for return.
Yeah.
And it's gonna
A
solve a problem they
difference.
have.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Which is why I love in the book how you position the fact that even though they need to own it as leaders, they need to walk it and talk it as HROD professionals, as advisors, we
yes,
can take a lot of burden off of the leaders in the sense of they don't need to think about necessarily the process, right? We can help
right,
lay out the journey. They
yes,
just need to know where to show up, so to speak. I mean, meaning that they have to understand that their behavior is critical,
yeah,
that how they show up. But if we are at least giving them some heads up on landmines, right? Because sometimes without even being aware,
yeah,
their own behavior is problematic in a sense, meaning they may be very direct, cut to the point, and that's just how they communicate. They think it's okay. It's just how they've always been. As advisors, we're there to mirror back and say, you know what, going through something like this approach is not going to work with this audience because, you need to now shift a little bit to be able to connect with these people the same way we need to find the words to connect with them. big part of advice I find I often give is to help them connect to their audience, because they tend to take a one size fits all approach. And then they come back and they say, well, I don't know. They don't seem to have understood. And I don't know why they don't get it. I hear this all the time, all the time, all the time. So as advisors, we don't usurp their role, but we help them step into it in a way that feels also effective for them. Because when they feel they're not succeeding at something, a leader will quickly, stop doing something that they feel they're not good at. I hear this a lot from leaders who'll say to me, I'm not good at that people stuff anyway. So they want to just shift it off, right? So that becomes the excuse. So that cannot be their way out, right? Just to say, I'm not good at that people stuff. This is more than just people. It is your business and it is how your business will succeed. So as advisors, how do we help equip them to feel like they can do this? It's not hard, or it's not messy. Or I've often heard, oh, I'm not a psychologist. Like, I don't
Oh,
know where
right.
they get that notion that they have to be a psychologist. I mean, it really, again, it's a core business competency to be able
Yeah.
to lead culture transformations.
Yeah. Well, I think you said a few things there that are important. I mean, one that resonates for me is, uh, when I'm speaking with leaders about this, uh, I really try and keep it focused on the business problem that we're trying to solve. And then when I'm talking about their role and their behaviors and their words, it's going to be, if we need to be, let's use collaboration again.
Mm-hmm.
If in order to be successful, and I had one client that I talk about in the book that needed to move from a very product specific offer to a broader integrated solution specific offer. That was a significant shift in strategy and operation that required cross business collaboration. And so when we're talking about the role of the leaders here, oh, I should say, I was first approached about this, I was asked to come in and coach one of the leaders who wasn't collaborative. And they saw that this leader, who happened to be named, well, in my book, I say is Caroline, it's actually not her real name. But anyways, this particular leader, they saw that she was the problem and needed to be fixed. And,
Mm.
through the conversation, we talked, and then I did work with Caroline, and the other leaders who were involved. It really, the focus was it's not about we're going to fix you. It was about, let's talk specifically about what that collaboration looks like. What are we going to do? We're going to create integrated sales teams to respond to customer RFPs. And they're going to be cross-functional, and we're going to bring in our technical people. And eventually they went to a bigger solution, which was more integrated, even more so across the holistic strategy. Um, but the whole conversation was just about, so how are they and their decisions day to day? What changes do they need to make in the way they reward people, in the way that they make decisions? So that it used to be like they pulled initially, I'll give an example, they pulled together a team to work on this, integrated response to request for customer proposal, but the decision makers remained within the different businesses. So each team member would go to their own leader to try and get a decision. Well, you know what happened there. It was okay on some things, but when you got to
Yeah.
price, and we had to have one of the business units, which happened to be Caroline's, had to actually agree to lower their prices in order to be able to have a competitive offer, then we had a real problem. I mean, those sorts of things started happening. That's really, I think, when you talk about the role of, the other thing you mentioned was the advisor,
Mm-hmm.
was the role of that the HROD team had here, was in really helping, in my case, helping Caroline and the other leaders to understand where those breakdowns were, and how the actions and decisions and choices they were making were sending a competing or conflicting message to the rest of the team about collaboration. And it's that level of awareness, and you know to I know we talk about the jargon, but it's you know helping them understand how their actions are creating dissonance.
Yep. Yep.
Sending competing, conflicting messages to people that then cause people to go, well, hold on a
What's
second
happening?
here. Do they really want me to be collaborative
Yeah.
here, or do they want me to continue to operate this way? That's the
Yeah.
sort of thing that we want to really start to have a conversation about. So it's not, so I guess where I'm going to with this is that I prefer not to have the conversation about I'm not good about this people stuff. And I prefer to keep the conversation focused on, we have a business problem to solve here, and here's your role in that business problem,
Yeah.
you know? And
Yeah.
and my role is to help you be successful, to
To
your
be
point.
successful.
I'm a
Yeah.
guide through this
Yeah.
process. I'm gonna help you get there. I have a way to help you get there. And if you can trust me to help you there with that, and also give me permission to be honest with you, to tell you when you're creating dissonance, and to then we can actually work through that to get that level of coherence we need, for people need, in order to be able to then lean into this, then we can work together.
Yeah. Yeah. So really important for us to be, like you say, able to help them see where they're getting in their own way of having
Yeah,
success.
yeah, they don't do it
And
intentionally, right?
no,
I
of
mean,
course.
yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, and even I find when I'm working with someone like Caroline, the way everybody assumed that it was out of personal gain. Not at all. She felt that for good reason, that in order for her to provide the best value to that organization, she needed to protect the interests of her business unit. That's how. So it came from a place of good, a positive intent,
Yeah.
and I found that's one of the big lessons I've learned, is that always assume positive intent. No leader, executive I have worked with has ever had anything but the best of intentions.
Yeah.
If they're acting differently, it's because they believe that the way they're doing things is the right and best way to do it,
Yeah.
and they haven't bought into the other. So that's what we have to talk about.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's interesting because that also can signal what the culture is about. Because if
True.
there's inherent mistrust, no matter what someone does or says, it's assumed to be from a negative intention. So,
Yeah.
that being said, as you were writing your book, when you think back, what are you most proud of?
Oh gosh, yeah, good question. What am I most proud of, other than getting it done?
Which is a big accomplishment for sure.
Yeah, getting it written. Um, uh, uh, you know what? I think I shared pretty coherently uh, some of the most important messages, like the things I really feel passionately about. The role of leaders, what that looks like, positioning culture not as a thing on its own, but as
Mhm.
something that's critical for business success. Talking about things like culture, strategy, alignment, and that relationship, and drag, and the how. And I offer up the approach that I take to actually create that alignment and coherence that's in there. So I do think there's a lot there that I mean, my motive for doing the book was I wanted to share that experience. I
Mm.
felt uh, if I ended my career tomorrow without having shared that experience, or at least put it out there, then I would not have been happy. I would have felt like I had failed in some way.
Um,
Whether anybody reads it or not, that's another thing. But
well,
hopefully.
I think that people will and should read this book. I personally was very privileged to read it because knowing you and having known you for a number of years, I think it's amazing that you have put it on paper, not only for yourself, but as I read it, I thought, wow, this was easy to follow. I've read many books over the years. I teach in the discipline as well, and so I know sometimes it's too theoretical, it's too heavy, and hard to understand what to do with it. So I appreciate that your book brought a sense of, I'm not going to say ease, but in a way, a lightness that took away a lot of the complexity of culture. And again, I don't want to pretend that it's easy or simple, but it's not as complicated as it's maybe, as you said earlier, made to be in often what we've heard and seen. So I appreciate that. And I think it's really important for people, whether you're in the profession about to embark on even a strategy initiative to think about, have we looked at it from all points of views? The book will bring some insights, I think, and some ways to think about how that strategy may or may not be executed. So that being said, where can people connect with you, Nancie, if they want to know more, and where can they find your book?
Okay, well, first of all, thank you. I'm glad you found it interesting, and hopefully it's of some value to you and some other folks. In terms of connecting with me, or probably the best place is through either LinkedIn. If they go and look for, Nancie Evans or Culture Strategy Fit, you'll find me. Same thing if you Google, go to Amazon, you can find the book Where Culture Meets Strategy. And also, of course, my website, which is culturestrategyfit.com. And there's a link to there's a page on the book and a link to Amazon in there as well. And also contact information on how to reach me.
Excellent. So thank you for your time. Appreciate having this conversation and look forward to possibly a next book.
Actually, it's funny you say that. I actually have already started thinking about the next book. So it's pretty, and I'm actually pretty excited about it. This was kind of if you want to think about it as an unloading of so many of the frustrations I've had and wanting to share with people about where I'm at with that, and how to break through that frustration by giving them, here's what I find is works. Finally, after 35 years, well, first, of course, I found out earlier, but it still was only probably about 5 years ago that I really got real clarity on this. Yeah, but I was, so I really wanted to share that with people, and that's why I wrote it. The next book is kind of, think of it as, whereas this is about fixing a problem, where culture's become a problem, this next one's going to be about building great cultures. So if you're a startup or you've got a culture that you want to protect, there's an organization that I work with that kind of really inspired me to start thinking about this, where they have a wonderful culture, like they do, but it's been strained by some recent events, including the pandemic, and they're wrestling with, there's some other events happening around them in the external environment that are affecting them, of course, and they're wrestling with, so how do we take this great culture that we've created and continue to protect it, nurture it, leverage it, build on it. And I thought, there's something really there, for where organizations, people who are just really wanting to build organizations with great cultures, or continue to protect the ones they have. That's next. That's what's next. I'm really quite excited about that. It's very positive.
Well, that will be definitely, I'm sure, another great piece to read. So looking forward to it, and we will connect as soon as that next book is written.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you so much for this, Caroline. I really, really appreciate it.
It was a pleasure as always, Nancie.